So who are you?
I am Jim Ivins. You asked me, wanted to ask me questions about my father, Harold Redd Ivins, who's known as Had Ivins.
What was his early life like?
Well, he was born in a little town of Lund, Nevada, on October 17th, 1901. As he later said, he was born in '01, which was kind of the turn of the century.
What was it like to grow up in Lund, Nevada?
Well, Lund, Nevada was one of the last Mormon colony or settlements, and so it was a very remote area. They came in on wagons and horses, and they started farming and taking over and kind of building a little town of Lund.
Where did Had go to school?
He went to school in Lund. They had a wooden school, a log building that was a school, and so he started school there when he was 6 and went to first grade and second grade. But by the time he got to the 8th grade, they didn't have anything. It didn't have a high school there, and so for about 2 winters, he went down to St. George and stayed with his relatives and went to high school for about 3 months each winter for high school. Later, he went to Utah State and did the same thing at Utah State. He would go in the wintertime and then come back in the spring to do the farm work.
So what did he do after college?
He didn't, let me tell you about his education first of all. He went to college at Utah State in about 1919, and the First World War ended on November the 11th, 1918, and all these soldiers came back and were schooled, and so they could take an exam to skip high school and qualify for college. And so when the soldiers started coming back from the First World War, he went with his brother up to Utah State and took kind of what we would call today a GED, a graduation equivalent diploma.
Yeah.
That he took that exam and scored very, very well.
Did any significant events happen while he was in college?
He was there mostly just for a few months in the year, but one of the interesting things was he lived with 2 sisters and 1 brother and he in one house, and their parents sent them $50 for all of them together to last the time that they were in college. So they all lived in one house and helped take care of each other, and he lived with his family.
Okay, and so, did he do any work during college?
He came back on the farm, and they milked cows and raised sheep and farmed, raised hay and vegetables and potatoes and things during the summer, and then he would go to college. He went to college maybe 2 winters for 2 or 3 months at a time, but didn't spend a lot of time at college.
So what happened after college?
Well, he was a single man, and he bought a car. His dad never learned how to drive a car, but he had a car and drove it around. I can't remember if it was a Studebaker or something like that. It was probably a Model T, probably a Model T Ford. But he did have a car and was a single man. He didn't marry until he was about, not quite, maybe 27 years old. I think he got married in 1929. He got married, and so he was not quite 28 years old when he got married.
And how many kids did he have?
He married my mother, whose name is Harriet Carter, and they got married on June the 10th, 1928, and they had 7 children, and I'm the youngest of those 7 children.
Youngest. And what happened in that time while you guys were growing up and stuff?
Well, my dad was a pretty avid baseball player, and his dad had really gnarled hands from playing baseball. His dad was a catcher, and they played baseball, throwing the ball overhand and hitting it hard and getting his fingers all broken up, and he was a catcher. And my dad had an old mitt that I had that I used, but it was just kind of a flat mitt, and it wasn't anything like a modern mitt. It really beat up your hand when you were playing it. But they liked to play baseball, and they had baseball teams, and they would, one weekend they would drive 7 miles to Preston and play the Preston team, and next weekend the Preston team would come out, drive back to Lund and play the Lund team. So it was, and all ages played it. The old men, the young men, the boys played on the baseball team between those 2 towns.
Did he live in Lund his whole life?
He lived in Lund his whole life until he got sick, and then he moved to Landing, Utah, and stayed in a care center there.
So, what did he do for a living?
He grew up as a farmer, worked for his dad and helped his dad, and they became dairy farmers mostly. And so he had dairy cows and milked cows twice a day and raised hay and grain to feed the milk cows. And all of his younger years, he milked like 15 to 20 to 30 cows every night and every morning. They would use a separator to separate the cream from the milk, and separate the milk and get the cream, and then they would feed the pigs the skim part of it, and they would make butter or sell the cream to a dairy and send it to the dairy later in life, and then later they would sell the whole milk to the dairy in Ely, which was 35 miles away.
Where did he live?
He lived in Lund most of his life. When my 2 older brothers, Tony and Ronnie, wanted to buy the farm from my dad, they spent quite a bit of money buying new dairy equipment and putting in bulk milk tanks. And they started shipping the milk first to Salt Lake, which was 285 miles away, and then later over to Reno, Nevada, which was about 300 miles away. And over time, it just became too expensive to ship the milk. And so my brothers, who were buying the farm from my dad and my mom, kind of went broke and just went out of business. And so my dad bought a motel to go back to work when he was about 60 years old, and ran a motel for about 4 or 5 years, and then he bought some apartments in Las Vegas and lived down there for a few years, and then but kept his home in Lund the whole time.
And then what happened after he lived in Las Vegas?
They sold the apartments in Las Vegas and started traveling around and visiting their kids and staying a few weeks at a time with their kids.
Okay, and do you have any advice for the youth today?
Yes. Let me tell you first a little bit about my dad's health situation. He'd been a very hard worker, but as he got older, his heart had troubles. So he came into Salt Lake and had open heart surgery from a man named Dr. Russell M. Nelson, who had spent his medical career learning how to do heart operations. And so my dad received a heart operation, and he did that when he was about maybe 75 or 76. And it worked for about 10 years, and then his heart. And he died in 1987.
And where did he die?
He was living at that time in the town of Blanding, Utah, where my brother Keith lived. And they were kind of helping take care of him in a care center in Blanding, where my mother also lived at the time.
And so what advice do you have for me today?
Well, my dad is an example of hard work. He was a very hard worker, and he had a good wife who supported him and helped him. So one advice would be to choose a good companion, a good mate to help you and support you and work with you, and to work hard and save your money and be frugal and be able to enjoy your older years. And that's one thing about my mom and my dad. They both loved to travel, and they did quite a bit of traveling. They went to Chicago for a World Fair. They went to San Francisco. They went to Hawaii to help bring my older brother home from his university. They went to Canada and visited the national parks up in Canada. Traveled around the United States on high-wing Georgia.
So what were some of the things he liked to do?
When he was young, he loved playing baseball, and his family liked to do that. His brother was a baseball player. His older brother, my dad really admired his older brother who had been in the First World War and came back and played basketball at Utah State. My dad used to say that his brother, Lorraine L.R. Ivins, invented the one-handed jump shot. Before his time, everybody shot the ball with two hands, and L.R. Ivins invented the one-handed jump shot that everybody uses now. He also liked to travel, and he liked to fish. And so as a young boy, they went fishing a couple of little streams, mountain streams near our hometown of Lund. One was the White River, and the other was Kern Creek. And those were those streams that you'd catch fish in. We also did a little bit of fishing, what you might call lake fishing, at a reservoir by the Coke Ovens, Cherry Creek, which was by the Coke Ovens out of Ely, Nevada. And we had a little ranch there. And my dad let us go up there, and he had a tapered fly line, which means that it's smaller on the end and bigger in the middle. And he was a good fly fisherman on that little reservoir, the little pond on Willow Creek. He also went fishing with friends down on the Colorado River, Willow Beach, down by below Lake Mead, Boulder Dam. And then he loved to fish go down with some friends and fish on Lake Powell, after the Lake Powell, after the, what do we call that dam?
Glen Canyon Dam.
Not Glen Canyon. He liked to fish at Lake Powell after they built the Glen Canyon Dam, and had a lot of good fishing there. And they would troll for bass in Lake Powell, and also do some fish for trout in Lake Powell. And my dad was a great hunter. He liked to hunt deer, and his birthday was October 17th, and the deer season...
Hang on, let me have you start. My phone is messing up here.
Loved to hunt, and in our country, big 4-point, 5-point deer were the kind of the prime hunting objects. And his birthday was October the 17th, and every year that's the time of year that deer season would start. And it was a big event for all the men in Lund to go out on the opening week of deer season and go over into K Valley and camp and take the horses and hunt deer. And he was a great hunter. One of the last memories I have of him was he also had some business dealings in Las Vegas with a guy that wasn't a very good businessman. And he owed my dad some money, and finally he gave him a new 270 rifle with a scope on it. And my dad liked that rifle a lot. It didn't make up for the money he lost with that guy, but he had good memories with the rifle. And he told the story that for over about 3 hunting seasons, he shot the rifle 5 times and got 6 deer. one deer he shot, he got 2 deer with 1 shot. And so he'd never had a gun with a scope on it before. And he was a very good shot, and he loved to deer hunt, and he had good memories of being a hunter all the time from the time he was a little boy. So that was one of his favorite things.